Well, again, Steve here with a few thoughts on what I'm going to call living a principled life. And talked about this before, about the philosophical standpoint of first principles, which is that it's kind of like a boundary we set for ourselves, right? Um, I'm going to operate within this parameter. For example, stealing from people is off limits, but I can do a lot of other things around that. Injuring other people is off limits, and so on. And many different organizations have done this sort of have attempted to help people to set up these sort of boundaries as to these are the things you should probably stay away from. Because that's often how I think it seems like, in looking into a lot of different traditions, the way to establish boundaries is to say what I can't do, right? Because then everything else is permissible. Like, for example, in the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, there's the Ten Commandments, right? And these are all thou shalt not. Well, mostly, except for the first few, which has to do with God, honor the father and the mother, and there's a few others, I suppose, but a lot of them are thou shalt nots. Seems to be the vast majority of them. So, and then in later Christianity, there was what they call the seven deadly sins, which were sort of a good advice to stay away from, and they are, I was just reading them here: pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. Yeah. I think I could make up a rap song about that, probably. But I mean, we can see that in a lot of cases, those things were probably best to stay away from. So once we realize that if we can sort of identify for ourselves, we don't have to necessarily follow all of these, because in some cases pride in somebody else's work or whatever is good. So what do they mean by that? Well, you could probably look it up and what they mean by it. But lust, I mean, if you're in love with somebody, you might also have lust for them. So it's, I mean, sometimes it's not good. Certain things, sloth, there's probably never a good idea to be a sloth unless you're a sloth. But yeah, but at least it's an example of, those are sort of prohibitions, right? Gluttony is the, sloth. Wrath, it's like, probably things to stay away from. There's what they're saying. So then, what that means then is it gives you a wide open vista of setting up the principled boundaries. I'm not going to be slothful anymore. So that means I'm going to somehow turn myself from that and then be more energetic and work towards meaningful goals or whatever. So I think there is a value in this whole first principle and looking at these older traditions and how they help themselves to set up these boundaries. And what I've noticed, a lot of them are thou shalt nots, the prohibitions. And even in the basics of common law, right? It's basically thou shalt not kill somebody else or injure somebody else or their property. Life, liberty, and property sort of thing, right? Stay away from other people's lives. In other words, injuring their lives, right? Don't injure their lives. Don't rip them off and lie to them. False contracts, fraudulent contracts. And don't steal their property, right? Everything else is fair game, right? You can be an honest person. You can be somebody who doesn't injure others. And you can be somebody who respects other people's property. Aside from that, that's like a first principle, right? It establishes a first principle, establishes a boundary for ourselves. And if we all do that, then we can be self-governing quite well. So I think it's interesting. Old Testament, or whether it's ancient commandments or old common law or neo-Christian seven deadly sins. These sort of things can help us, I think, to establish our first principles that work fundamentally with us. Hope this is helpful. Great chatting. Steve here again. We'll talk again soon.